Leadership. It can be acquired in a myriad of different ways. There's as many different kinds of leaders as there is different kinds of people to lead. And while many argue, what is the best way to become a leader? What is the best way to lead? Is it fear? Is it through trust? Is it through understanding? There are a few undeniable truths when it comes to becoming a leader. And quite possibly the most important out of all of those truths is that one of the most important things in becoming a leader who sticks around is being powerful, whether that be through the conveyance of military force or just you yourself being a physically imposing human being. Power is important when it comes to leadership, so long as that's the message you want to send. There's plenty of leaderships out there that don't try to convey power, and that type of rule is just as valid as a leadership that feels as though they need to convey power. However, pretty exclusively in anime, leaders of troops or groups or countries are, if not the strongest, one of the strongest people in said country or group or troop. Because in the anime worlds, there truly is nothing more important than power. And while some people in anime gain their power through political gerrymandering or being well spoken or simply just being born into it, much more often than not, the person who can punch you the hardest gets put in charge. That's the case with Obito, that's the case with Crollo, and that's the case with a lot of Fire Force squad captains. Actually, pretty much all of them except for one. And that's because in the Fire Force universe, strength is pretty much the most important thing. Infernals don't really listen to logic. It doesn't matter how well spoken you are. It's really about how good you are at exercising these demons. Latom. But just because you're the strongest out of all the captains doesn't necessarily make you the greatest Fire Force captain. That is how we're going to be ranking them in today's video, because that's what people love. Because in today's video, we're talking the Fire Force captains ranked and explained. But before I get into ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys love the sound of my voice talking about anime, you're gonna love my anime podcast, Who Talk is Anonymous, where me and Benimaru break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So, as we all know in the Fire Force universe, there are 8 squad of firefighters. And every single one of these different squads has a different role to play in the battle against Infernals. While some squads are heavily tied into the church, other squads are heavily tied into the military, while other squads are dedicated almost entirely to healing. And this is why there's 8 squads, so each individual squad can do what they're good at. However, because of this, every single squad needs a very individual captain, as having a captain whose entire abilities revolve around healing on the military squad wouldn't make a lot of sense. And therefore, a lot of the captains of these 8 squads are actually reflections of what their squads are about, or what their role is in the battle against Infernals. And while we get significantly more time with some captains than we do with others, everything we've seen from every captain on this list has proved that they all deserve to be captain, meaning that they're all legitimate contenders in the Fire Force universe. They're all very strong in their own rights. However, since today we are talking about how hard they punchy, some captains are at a distinct disadvantage. And really that applies to no captain more than our captain in 8th place, Kyoko. See, Kyoko is no joke. She's a 3rd generation pyrokinetic, and she's the captain of Squad 6. See, as the leader of Squad 6, Kyoko was never gonna be the strongest pyrokinetic user in Fire Force. See, Squad 6's biggest goal in the battle against Infernals is actually to make sure that firefighters are treated with proper medication so they can get back onto the battlefield. Squad 6 runs a hospital that Kyoko is the leader of. But it's kind of a weird one, because according to the Holy Soul Temple, the only people who are able to administer medication are the church itself. Is the church itself. Church is singular. But since Squad 6 is more focused on the science and the medicine of healing people and less of the latoming, the connection between the two is strictly for PR. However, just because Squad 6 is usually occupied in the hospital that they run doesn't mean that they don't actually fight Infernals. They do, but they usually fight Infernals in more of a public safety sense. Like, it's not that an Infernal pops up in the middle of Tokyo and everyone's like, call Squad 6. However, Squad 6 will work in a support capacity to make sure that certain areas are protected from Infernals, and should an Infernal wander into the space that they're protecting, they will battle said Infernal. So if Kyoko is the leader of a squad that does occasionally battle against Infernals, she must be pretty strong herself, right? Well, sort of. I mean, she's not powerful. Like we've already said, she's a 3rd generation pyrokinetic, which means she's able to create flames out of nothing. But her ignition ability isn't offensive. It's actually medicinal. See, Kyoko's ignition ability actually manifests in a sceplia, which has been a symbol of hospitals for thousands of years. It's a rod with 2 serpents wrapping around it. And with this sceplia, she's able to increase somebody's cell division. And by increasing somebody's cell division, she's able to speed up how fast that person heals. It works identically to Tsunade and chakra strength of 100 CL, as they use the massive amount of chakra in their bodies to increase the mitotic regeneration of their cells, which allows them to regrow arms or close wounds. However, Kyoko's healing ability goes a bit beyond just closing wounds. She can cure diseases, treat symptoms, or close wounds. So if you had a headache and you weren't entirely sure why you had the headache, she could get rid of the headache. However, if you had a cold, she could also get rid of the cold. Or if you've been stabbed in the arm, she could close the wound in your arm. And that's just what she can do for second generation pyrokinetics. See, if you're a third generation pyrokinetic, Kyoko can actually use the flames that you create as a third generation pyrokinetic to increase how fast you heal and eliminate your pain instantly. So while her ignition ability may not be offensive or even defensively based, it is an incredibly powerful medicinal tool. And since Squad 6 is responsible for running a hospital that gets firefighters back on the front lines, a woman who's able to manifest a magical Escaplion that can heal basically anything is more than qualified to be the leader. But Kyoko isn't the only one out of the Fire Force squad captains to have more of a support role ignition ability, because coming up in our number 7 spot we have Soichiro Haig. See, Haig is the captain of Squad 4. I just remembered they're all called companies, and I've been calling them Squad this entire video. Haig is the captain of Company 4. And since Company 4 is actually directly controlled by the Fire Defense Agency, which are just regular firefighters, not like we punch infernals firefighters, like we have a hose firefighters. Company 4 is actually more structured like a regular fire division, as after all, the Fire Defense Agency doesn't battle against infernals. They actually focus on making sure that the amount of damage caused by infernals is kept at a minimum, because the firefighters who are battling against these infernals and the infernals are putting out a massive amount of fire, so the Fire Defense Agency is there to put that fire out. And that's who's pulling the strings on Company 4. And because Company 4 is the crossing grounds between the Fire Defense Agency and the firefighters who fight infernals, they supervise the Special Fire Force Training Academy, meaning that anybody who wants to become a firefighter that fights infernals has to technically come through Company 4. Now, Soichiro is definitely one of the more interesting captains in Fire Force. See, Soichiro used to be a pretty regular guy until the Great Catastrophe in the year 196. During this great disaster, Soichiro had an Adola link, and during that Adola link, he was slashed across the face. After that moment, he changed forever and became a man endlessly looking to feel the flames of Adola on his skin once again. And considering that Adola flames are the hottest flames in the universe, it's a big ask. What's even weird about Soichiro is that we don't even technically know if he was a pyrokinetic, as he never once displayed any pyrokinetic abilities. He was an incredibly formidable fighter using firefighter tools, and his favorite weapon were safety wires that he could quickly use to deflect attacks and restrain enemies. And even in his old age, he was able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of white-clad members like Gold and Shinra. That's slightly misleading. Shinra is not a white-clad member. But when Shinra entered a feral state after making a Adola link with the first pillar, Soichiro, while being backed up by his Lieutenant Pan, who has the ability to buff somebody's pyrokinetic resistances, their attack power, their defense power, their stamina, all by blowing his whistle, it's his ignition ability, was able to battle Shinra to a relative standstill, and probably would have done a lot better in the battle if he wasn't constantly trying to be burned by Shinra's Adola flames. But obviously, since Soichiro goes on to lose to Gold, a third generation pyrokinetic from the White Clad, he can't be that high on this list. It's hard to be one of the most powerful company captains when you have no pyrokinetic ability, which pretty much perfectly takes us to our next entry on this list, because coming in at number 6, we have Obi. Listen, I know. I love Obi too. He's one of my favorite characters in Fire Force. And yes, I know by the end of the manga, he is technically one of, if not the strongest character in the universe. But talking about Obi in the capacity of the Soul Eater universe doesn't really make sense for a video about ranking Fire Force captains. So I'm not taking into account what happens at the end of the manga. Obi is probably the captain that we know the most about, as Obi is the captain of Company 8, which is the company that Shinra and Arthur and Tamaki all belong to. That's actually not true. Tamaki is kind of just alone. But Obi, unlike Soichiro, is canonically unpowered. It's not that we'd never see him use pyrokinetic abilities, it's that he simply cannot. But for Obi, that's not really a problem, because Obi's able to overcome pretty much all of the issues that he faces in the Fire Force universe through the medium of working out. See, Obi is the leader of probably the weirdest company in all of Fire Force, as Company 8 is the smallest by far out of all of the companies in Fire Force, as unlike every other company in Fire Force, it doesn't have a research or a science division. However, Company 8 was shoddily brought together so that they could find some great minds and some great fighters to unravel the mystery of spontaneous human combustion, as well as investigate the 1st through 7th companies to make sure that they're not withholding any information about out infernals in the Holy Soul Temple, which makes sense when you consider the fact that almost every single other company is associated with some greater power in one way or another. And thus Obi's abilities, at least within the Fire Force universe, are just as strange as his company. See, Obi, before he joined the Special Fire Force, was an incredibly decorated regular firefighter, and thus he knows very well how to stay calm in the face of a great flame. And how does Obi decide to fight against infernals? Well, hysterical strength and a bunch of tools. See, Obi is so strong he's able to rip train tracks out of the ground and bend steel with his bare hands, and he uses this strength to get close enough to infernals that he can use some specific firefighting tools that allow him to actually even the playing field between him and infernals, like his core annihilating pile bunker, or just his standard firefighting axe that he can use to destroy the core of an infernal. On top of this, Obi has an insane pain tolerance, charging headfirst into fire or grabbing infernals with his bare hands regardless of what it does to his skin. He's even gone so far as to let Benimaru strike him with his ignition ability just to create an opening. And even though hysterical strength in the Fire Force universe actually refers to a third generation pyrokinetics ability to up their fire output in certain situations, Obi is also able to access hysterical strength, at least according to Benimaru, with the best example of this being when Obi managed to flex his way out of metal chains. And while as a strategist and a captain, Obi is incredible, unfortunately, in a list of combat-oriented Fire Force captains, I can't put him above anybody else who has a pyrokinetic ability. Sure, he can take a beating, sure, he can bend metal, but the majority of the captains on this list are stronger than him. Not by the time we get to Soul Eater, I'm aware, but in Fire Force. And the first of those captains that's stronger than Captain Obi is our number 5 spot, Hibana. Hibana is a third generation pyrokinetic and the captain of Company 5. Now, Company 5's allegiance is to Hajime Industries. And since 70% of the Tokyo Empire works for Hajime Industries, and Hajime Industries has its finger in basically everything in the Tokyo Empire, Company 5 actually isn't the only company associated with Hajime Industries, as Company 3 is also associated with them. However, Company 5 is technically supposed to be an auxiliary unit under the control of the army. However, instead of this, more often than not, they do operate in the best interests of Hajime Industries. And Hajime Industries is incredibly morally gray, like any large industry. While they are incredibly instrumental in protecting the Tokyo Empire in the later stages of the manga, they also actively experiment on children to try and create the next pillar. So little good, lot of bad. Sounds like basically every conglomerate in the world. And thus, just like our company, Hibana is kind of morally gray. She grew up an orphan in the Holy Soul Temple, beside Iris. See, one day the orphanage that Hibana and Iris lived in was subject to spontaneous human combustion, and thus the entire orphanage was burnt down, and almost all of the sisters that Hibana and Iris had died. Now, this event led Hibana to believe that her powers as a pyrokinetic were evil, but it also created a hunger inside of her for power and revenge. And thus, Hibana would begin to experiment on the bodies of infernals to try and figure out the secrets behind spontaneous human combustion. And she would sell this information to Hajime Industries in exchange for money and also the title of captain. Now, like I've already stated, Hibana is a third generation pyrokinetic, and her ability allows her to create flowers out of fire that she calls clematis. And Hibana is able to manifest these flames around an opponent, and should you touch these flames, not only will you be singed, but you'll also be cut, as her flames are actually sharp. And we've seen that these cherry blossom-like flames are able to destroy multiple infernal cores in one swoop. On top of this, Hibana has a unique third-generation pyrokinetic ability. She can control the temperature around her, kind of like Sho, Shinra's brother, which allows her to actually snuff out ignition abilities that rely on outside factors. A lot of second-generation pyrokinetic abilities. On top of this, she's also able to surround somebody's body in an intense heat that essentially gives them heat stroke, causing them to be dizzy and faint. And she can do this to multiple people at once. So if Hibana has all these broken abilities, why is she so low on this list? Well, Hibana actually prides herself as a researcher, not a barbarian, because Hibana didn't go to the Special Fire Force Academy. She went straight from the orphanage to researching infernals to being a captain. And thus, she doesn't have traditional training in being a special firefighter. And because of this, her endurance and durability is remarkably low for a captain of a Fire Force company, as she's been knocked unconscious by things just hitting her head or being punched once. And since she really doesn't have much in the way of battle IQ, if you figure out her abilities and get around them once or twice, she really doesn't have much of a way to counterattack. So even though she is a genuinely impressive third generation pyrokinetic, she's not going to be that high on the list, especially when you consider that coming in at number 4 on this list is Giovanni. Remember how we were talking about how there was another company that was associated with Hajime Industries? Yeah. The other company is the company that Giovanni is in charge of, Company 3. Now, Giovanni is interesting as a captain because he's not a 3rd generation pyrokinetic. He's a 2nd generation pyrokinetic, meaning that he can't create flames of his own. He can simply manipulate existing flames. Now, Giovanni is a bit different from Hibana because even though Hibana is sadistic and sold information to Hajime Industries, Giovanni, while being a shill for Hajime Industries, was also a white clad, making him the first captain on this list that's a bad guy, but not the last. And Company 3 kind of follows suit here. Company 3, much more than Company 5, are shills for Hajime Industries, but they're shills for Hajime Industries' more nefarious wants, and thus as a company they're pretty much the bad guys, which is why the members of Company 3 are fully willing to attack Vulcan's workshop when Vulcan refuses to go work for Giovanni, as they believe that Vulcan has the key to Amaterasu. As when people find out that Giovanni is a member of the White Clad when he flees, a lot of the people in his company also flee to the White Clad. Now, Giovanni, as any villainous character should, has an incredibly long laundry list of abilities. Giovanni has taken point-blank shots from Shinra and Captain Obi and just shrugged them off. He uses his 2nd generation pyrokinetic abilities to control the myriad of different pyrokinetic tools he keeps under his cloak, like mechanical hands that he can fire like projectiles to grab onto people or increase his attack range. Not to mention these mechanical hands are attached to wires that are able to slice through trees and humans. But to go even further than that, Captain Giovanni also has insect physiology. See, Giovanni, rather than being a human, is actually just millions of firebugs. And as Giovanni is now just a bunch of bugs in human skin, he's able to react to things like bullets because he has insect compound eyes. He can sense emotions and intents through the pheromones that people release, like a moth. He can create sharp insect appendages and disperse his body into a bunch of bugs in order to avoid any damage. Even if you cut off Captain Giovanni's head, since he's just bugs, he can then just make his head the main body and run away. And since his body is composed of infernal bugs, he has a constant connection to Adola, allowing him to communicate with others through Adola. And should things get truly desperate for Giovanni, he's able to transfer his consciousness to somebody else by making one of the infernal bugs in his body bite them. And then that infernal bug essentially uploads Giovanni's consciousness into that new body. However, if that bug is destroyed on that person's body, then that person is released from Giovanni's consciousness. So because he's pretty much immune to physical and fire-based attacks and almost impossible to kill, I'm gonna have to put Giovanni in the dead center of this list. Which brings us to our top 3, which starts with our number 3 spot, Gustav. Gustav is the captain of Company 2. Company 2 reports directly to the Tokyo Army, making them the most militarized out of any of the companies. And thus Gustav dresses accordingly in full military regalia. And Gustav is a 3rd generation pyrokinetic, though he manifests his pyrokinetic abilities in a weird way. So Gustav can manifest his pyrokinetic ability from his scalp, which is bald, probably because it's always on fire. And he can use these flames to repel and destroy objects. And outside of being able to create fire from his scalp, he's also incredibly fast, strong, and durable, which is important when you consider the fact that his favorite move is using himself as a human projectile and headbutting any infernal he wants dead. And Gustav has shown that he's able to use his technique against some of the strongest infernals we've ever seen, like the giant infernal that he headbutted and destroyed, or like in Chapter 8 of the manga when he fired himself out of a cannon as a projectile. Gustav is not only shaped like a human bullet, he uses himself like one to devastating effect. And that is pretty much, unfortunately, all we know about him. He's a wild guy. But simply for the fact that he's able to wipe out giant infernals, that's gonna put him pretty high on this list. But not as high as our number 2 spot, because not only do we know a lot more about our number 2 spot, but everything we know about our number 2 spot is incredibly intimidating. The space between the top 2 spots on this list and the rest of the list is insurmountable, because coming in at number 2 is Leonard Burns. Leonard Burns is the captain of Company 1, which is mostly composed of members from the Holy Soul Temple, who are in charge of Shinjuku in Tokyo. However, since the Holy Soul Temple isn't exactly as holy as the name would suggest, Company 1 is actually probably the most evil company out of all of the companies, as they carry out all of the dirty work for the Holy Soul Temple. And the one doing the majority of that dirty work is our captain, Leonard Burns. Though that's not necessarily Leonard Burns' fault. See, Leonard Burns is not only a firefighter, but a priest as well. And therefore, his sense of duty to the church was unwavering for a large part of his life. And therefore, as an incredibly powerful pyrokinetic and also an incredibly devout Holy Soul Templeist, he was tasked with a lot of work for the Holy Soul Temple that he didn't necessarily deem as dirty work. And because of his insane pyrokinetic abilities, more often than not, he was able to get it done. Leonard's ignition ability is so powerful, it's known as Fire Incarnate. But his pyrokinesis ability isn't the only thing that's powerful about him, as his durability and superhuman strength allowed him to take multiple shots from Shinra and even block his rapid. But he's actually taken it one step further than that. He's tanked shots from Shinra while Shinra was using his hysterical strength. He's tanked shots from Joker. But at the end of the day, what truly makes Leonard Burns is his pyrokinesis. His ignition ability is known as Voltage Nova, which essentially operates by Leonard heating up his body to increase his own physical output. And the longer that Leonard keeps his ignition ability activated, the hotter his body gets and the stronger and faster and more durable he becomes. And there are levels to Voltage Nova. And with every level Leonard goes up, he becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Now, so far as we currently know, there's only 5 stages. Though we don't know if there's an upper limit, and Joker stated with enough time that Leonard could become invincible. In stage 1, Leonard is able to deflect things like Arthur's plasma attack with his bare hand. He's also able to either redirect or fully stop Shinra's kicks. In stage 2, he emits so much heat and pressure that people actually can't reach him, as powerful attacks will simply fail to punch through the aura that he's emitting. Attacks that would have made Burns bleed in stage 1 now basically do no damage to him in stage 2. So it's a massive buff to his durability. In stage 3, Leonard becomes so strong he can pick somebody up and smash them through concrete with one hand. Not to mention he's also able to tank a hellfire kick from Shinra in this form. And this is after Shinra learns that he can increase his fire output by using the corna, or throwing up the horns. By the time that Burns gets to stage 4, he's able to tank grace-empowered explosions. Yes, that's right, he's able to tank shots from people with an Adola Grace or an Adola Link. Mind you, when Shinra gains an Adola Link, he's able to go faster than the speed of light, which breaks him down on a subatomic particle level, giving him technically infinite mass. And that's not even his strongest form, because there's also stage 5, which might be his final stage, but we don't know. So yeah, he's not the kind of guy you want to piss off or give enough time to get fired up, as technically really nobody on Earth when Leonard was in stage 5 could have defeated him at that current moment. So for a second or two, Leonard was the most powerful entity on Earth. However, unfortunately for Leonard, people scaled a little bit beyond him. And by a little bit, I mean a lot of it. Because coming in at number 1 is by far and away our most powerful captain in the entirety of the Fire Force universe, pre-Soul Eater, Benimaru. Benimaru is a 2nd and 3rd generation pyrokinetic who's the captain of Company 7. Now, Company 7 are the only company outside of Company 8 without some outside allegiances to some greater entity. They are a completely independent Fire Force company. In fact, Benimaru goes so far as to say that his Fire Force company is just the neighborhood watch. They're not associated with Hajime or the Holy Soul Temple. All they care about is protecting people. And therefore, outside of Company 8, they're the best guys in the universe. And they're led by probably the fan favorite character in the entirety of the Fire Force universe, Benimaru. And being led by Benimaru is more or less what you want. Benimaru is known as the strongest officer in the Special Fire Force, and he's backed up this claim multiple times. Benimaru by himself fought against Maki, Tamaki, Shinra, Arthur, and Hanawa, pretty much the entire fighting force of Company 8, and came out victorious. But this isn't even the most impressive thing that he's accomplished. It's actually not even close to the most impressive thing he's accomplished. See, my anime-only friends obviously remember when Benimaru hit a Demon Infernal with the best sound effect of all time. And in that moment, Benimaru 1v1ing a Demon Infernal cemented him as one of the strongest people in the universe. As pretty much outside of him, the only people who have ever been able to defeat a Demon Infernal is Shinra when he had an Adola Link with the Woman in Black. And Benimaru did it without an Adola Link or an Adola Grace. He just did it by being the king of destruction of Asakusa. But that isn't even his most impressive feat. See, Benimaru is instrumental in the late game of the manga. And more importantly, he's instrumental in battling against doppelgangers. See, in the Fire Force universe, there are 2 universes. There's the Adola and the Overworld. And there are exactly as many souls in the Adola as there is in the Overworld. Every single human on Earth has a reflection in the Adola. And that reflection is called a doppelganger. And that doppelganger is actually an amalgamation of how everybody on Earth feels about you. The best example to explain in order to help you understand doppelgangers better is Shinra. See, as we all know, Shinra is an incredibly gentle and kind soul. However, because he smiles when he gets gets excited or nervous and he's got big jagged teeth, everybody assumes he's a demon. And therefore Shinra's doppelganger is very demonic. He's mean, he's powerful, he likes destroying things, even when Shinra himself in the overworld is nothing like that. Now take that example and apply it to Benimaru. Benimaru is known the world around as the most powerful officer in the Special Fire Force. He's known as the King of Destruction in Asakusa. Benimaru is a character of folklore, with people revering him as one of the most powerful people on Earth, and thus his doppelganger is insanely powerful. So powerful that it could destroy the entire Earth in one attack. However, before Benimaru's doppelganger gets the chance to destroy the Earth, Benimaru cuts it down. In one attack, mind you, one hits a planetary level threat. And since Benimaru has to cut through this very attack that's gonna destroy the Earth, it very easily scales Benimaru to a planetary level, which actually isn't even that much in the Fire Force universe. It makes him top 4, maybe top 5. Now, Benimaru's doppelganger, just like the original Benimaru, had both second and third generation pyrokinetic abilities. And Benimaru is the only person with both of the generations, so far as we know, which means that Benimaru is the only person who can create his own flames and control external flames. I mean, like, obviously Shinra Bancho Man can do it, but like, what can't Shinra Bancho Man do? And by the way, this feels important to note that Benimaru's doppelganger created a Nichiren, you know, that circle of flames that Benimaru creates around the entire planet, and he was gonna bring that onto the planet to destroy it. And Benimaru being able to defeat his doppelganger makes sense when you consider the fact that people like Conro have compared him to Kagutsuchi, the god of fire in Japanese mythology. And for all intents and purposes, he basically is. Anything that you can do pyrokinetically, so can he. He can fly, just like Shinra, by channeling his pyrokinetic abilities through his mop thing. It's called him a toy. I had to look it up. Not to mention he can also control the path and speed of bullets like Lieutenant Hinawa. He can create a 4-meter barrier around himself that doesn't allow heat to come through it, nullifying all pyrokinetic attacks. But he's not just the god of the sun and fire, he's also apparently the god of the moon. Because when he was battling against his former master's doppelganger, Hibachi, he combined his 2 pyrokinetic attacks, Crimson Moon and Sun Wheel, in order to create an entirely new attack that combined his affinity for both the sun and the moon. And that attack is known as Crimson Moon Sun Wheel. It's very creative, but the attack was so powerful it was able to completely eviscerate the demon infernal that was Hibachi's doppelganger. And the fact that it's stronger than Crimson Moon, when Crimson Moon is a pyrokinetic ability that makes a fireball so big that people think it's a mood, that's saying a lot about its destructive output. So yeah, pretty easily is Benimaru number 1 amongst all captains. Until, of course, Obi comes around in Soul Eater. Because when Fire Force becomes Soul Eater, the true measure of strength is actually how strong your will is, and Obi has the strongest will out of anybody in the Fire Force universe. Obi then becomes the leader of the new military that is formed in the Soul Eater universe. And it's stated in the ending chapters of the manga that Obi is so powerful he could tear apart the earth with one hand. Which could hypothetically just be saying that Obi could like reach in and grab a chunk of earth out of the earth, or that if Obi plunged his hand into the earth and ripped up, he would destroy the entire earth, like Saitama battling against Cosmic Fear Garo. I like to go with the latter. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with my list? Did you learn anything new about some of your favorite captains? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Boy, would a new season of the anime be great. I'm sure I'm the only one who feels that way.